Today on, we're going to do a sort of sustainability panel, but there's going to be a few other interwoven messages as there have been today around startup, around automation, around digitalization, and a few other subjects. But just to reintroduce, we've got Emma here from Automata, Andy from Laboratories, Morsal from Clustermarket, Francesco from Synthace, and myself. So we get started.
Have you considered the sustainability of your products or what the impacts are of them?
Absolutely. So what we have realized is that a lot of people, whenever we speak with them, they use a lot of outdated systems, which causes a lot of the time that they waste because of that. So it saves you a lot of time, but also Francesco mentioned with the solution you get a lot of information on how the equipment is used to its fully potential. And that helps. What we have realized is the tool not only helps you in organizing, so on the operational side, but also helps you in a lot of financial decisions that you can make. If I answer you, if that's the question you were looking.
Yeah, I was wondering about environmental sustainability but I think, yeah. So.
I might just jump in with one just sort of around the lab side, but basically we have a couple of things. One is kind of know where your samples are, so you don't need to buy more in if these are ones that you can purchase, so there's less wastage hopefully, and therefore also your freezer is less loaded, it's having less power used to keep it cool, and it's more organised. So again, there's less frost, there's less energy being used for the parts of the freezer that are overworking. Additionally, finding the experiments, then you're not repeating the experiments as well. If something's in a lab notebook, guess what happens every time there's a summer student, they do the same project every year, and they might get different results, but sometimes they get the same results, and they just want to kind of do that again the next year without looking at, actually, we've done this already, and these were the results, let's move on and do something different this summer. So, and likewise, with the more important masters and PhD students as well. So, and senior scientists in companies as well. Perhaps somebody else wants to chip in here, perhaps.
Yeah, just to add on that, what we realize is that a lot of the environmental, especially the sensors, the way they use the sensors is if they have an error with their experiment, they can look back if the reason for that error was because there was something with the temperature, if there was something with the freezers was open for a long time. So it helps you with making, if you basically can capture better understanding of your results with that specific data you get from the environmental solution sensors. So with the reproducibility, it helps you with that as well.
Can I chip in as well, Chris? It's a fantastic question, and I think for Automata the answer is it depends. A lot depending on application and on the situation that the customer had been in previously and why they want an automated system. To give one example, we see one of our CROs that we work with had to do 20% repetition of their assays, and that was largely due to manual error. Eliminating that obviously then takes you near to zero of repetition. So you're saving reagents, you're saving tips, consumables. So there are a lot of, there are impacts. A lot of them are dependent on the customer situation. But I'm happy to speak to more of those sorts of case studies later in the panel if interesting.
Sorry, just a quick comment on Martin's question. Very, very tough and good question. I guess the main challenge when it comes to software companies and products is to assess the carbon footprint of their cloud solutions. I've worked with, I didn't show any of the data, but when I had a look at the first measurement for the carbon footprint of our company, the one thing that I realized is that cloud storage solutions account for about 40% of our footprint. That includes the lab, which is about 10%, and international travel, which makes for the vast majority of the rest. But my point being that cloud storage solutions, you have to find out where where they get the energy from and how they offset that, or?
Well, it depends. So your Emma system. So one of the things Emma can look at is she spoke about the meters squared space she saved. A lot of universities now put a financial figure next to that, so that would actually help in her business cases. But I think one of the things Martin was trying to get at is the stuff you're supplying, how much carbon went into supplying that, how long does it last for, and what happens to it when it's at its end of life. So I think being able to provide that data up front will give you some scope 3 emissions that you're going to have to put to people, your clients who are going to be asked to report on such things. And as far more knowledgeable people than me will tell you, the scope 3 emissions are the big thing.
That's right, okay. So we'll try and get back to this, or we may skip it, but have a quick look. There were some questions around, it was kind of really saying what were the top actions to have effect on sustainability. I guess keeping things organised and clean, that was more to do with the freezers and things like that. Implementing and adhering to safety protocols, sticking to those protocols, having a good system that can do that. Calibrating and maintenance of equipment. I guess if equipment's old and it's not performing very well, it's better, you've got to make sure it's calibrated from time to time. Effective communication and collaboration with the science. So these apparently were the ones, but were there any in the audience perhaps, I don't know what people think of this. Maybe you want to raise your hands with number 1, the cleaning and organisation. Any takers on that at all? Yeah, great, okay, thank you, Steffi. Implementing and adhering to safety protocols, anybody interested in that? Okay, that would be a no. Calibration and maintenance of equipment, is that important? Jack, any other takers? Yeah, okay, we'll go for 1 there. And effective communication and collaboration, is that important? Yeah, okay, Martin, thank you. Yeah, a few there. Okay, great. Yeah, interesting to know. Just thought I'd start off with a little kind of poll. This picture here, what do you know about Laboratories? This is our block heater. It's really just to think about, what do we really know about the lab equipment? I think it ties in nicely with Martin's question. Can we manage the equipment better? Can we maintain it better? Do we just need to always buy a new one, or can we fix things, or can we look at new ways of working, like with Automata? Perhaps just to ask here, what do we know about equipment? I think maybe this would be a good one for Andy to answer, if that's all right, just running it straight at you. What do we really know about equipment, and how important is this to sustainability?
Okay, it's a very expansive question. So there's about 42 different lab cost factors at minimum for each piece of equipment, and they all interact just like the bits of a watch or genes that interact with each other on a metabolic pathway. So knowing what the impacts are pretty important to give you an understanding of how you can get the most out of that piece of equipment, manage it, and make it the most efficient possible. So all the different things that were raised earlier. So what came up? Calibration. Okay, and would you say safety? So if you don't calibrate your fume hoods, for example, they might be not operating safely enough, or they might be operating at a higher face velocity in order to operate safely, which could be increasing their energy consumption by 20, 25, 30%. That's a few £100 per year per fume hood per building. So even though when we did that kind of raise of hands, some people found one thing important, one thing found another, they all actually act in conjunction with another, and they very rarely act in isolation. Like we do training on this, and one of the things that both Martin and I try and highlight is that all these different factors you need to be aware of, and it's always best to have a broad range of people interacting and working on those. So even if you want to write a decent procurement spec, you need the lab users, the technical staff, and the people from the States to all understand where they're all coming from, rather than someone in a procurement position, for example, buying something because it was the cheapest, or putting 40% weighting on price When you've got over 40 different factors, price being just one of them, why do you give that 40% of the mark? Some procurement people will say that gives us the cheapest item of equipment and negotiates the best price. I've got news for you: the cheapest item of equipment will always be the cheapest, but the item with the best running costs is going to maybe cost a little bit more up front, but cost a little bit less to operate during its lifespan. So to come full circle on that, you have to, each item of equipment is going to have its own specific area of criteria from a larger pool of factors. And so understanding those, you can have a huge impact on what you're using and how you're saving stuff. And that's money that can go elsewhere. And if you operate your fume hoods better, you can have more fume hoods open. They're more robust, so they're more safer to work at, and you can even put more stuff in them. And the more stuff you put in a fume hood actually increase its energy consumption. So that's where, to quote someone better than me, safety and sustainability are on the same timeline. So that's my two penneth.
Maybe Francesco or Morsal, I don't know if you have any insights around equipment, perhaps.
I'll just say that I agree completely. I think you have to put all of these things into the same basket. They're not, entities that exist on separate timelines, as you said. There's going to be like a domino effect at some point if you don't look after them all at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with both of you. So what I have heard a lot, I mentioned that in my presentation as well, it's an operational challenge that people actually do not have data on their equipment usage. And this information is very crucial because it helps you with making informed decisions. But also maintenance and a well-maintained equipment is important. So I think it's crucial to have a tool for that, and the tool helps you with getting that data.
Yeah, I just may add something to that. I think with the equipment scheduling, I think it is, that there are two things there that Francesco talked about and Morsal talked about. I think it's great to have the equipment schedule so you know what's planned, and then the sensors, that's great to know what's actually being used or what you think's being used. But when it comes to purchasing decisions, then do you really need that new piece of equipment? If you look at these equipment schedulers, then you can see actually, well, it's only being booked for 20% of the week's time. Maybe you just need to plan your week better, not turn up on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock all queuing for the same piece of equipment. Maybe using better designing tools with Synthace and things like that. You can actually plan these things better, or you could do away with all your equipment and you can just have an Automata system to organise all of these things. So I think there's lots of options there. But no, thank you very much, Annie, for your insights there. I'll just move on to the next slide here, hopefully. Sorry, these are some of these should be. We should have mentioned these already previously, so you should be aware of some of these subjects. But one thing that's quite important, I think, with sustainability is materials selection. So we think about all our different samples and reagents, buffers, and everything that we use, acids, bases. Are they eco-friendly? And likewise, are the lab consumables that you're putting them in, the plastics? Are they real plastics or are they something else? Maybe I'll go to Francesco on this one, perhaps just around maybe how you run your lab, what you think about, as I think you're a bit of a model citizen, hopefully.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say, I think this partially circles back to what we were talking about earlier, right? How everything is connected. So you mentioned safe and sustainable reagents. It's safe and sustainable for the lab user as well as for the environment. I'm thinking specifically about DNA dyes that you can use for blots and whatnot. And what was the other half of your question? Sorry.
To do with material selection and kind of eco-friendly lab consumables.
Yes. The other thing that I was going to say is that I agree it's about that, but it's also about what happens downstream of that. One scheme that I was particularly proud to phase in a few months ago was there's a system from Appleton Woods. It's basically just a bin that you can use to recycle some of your gloves. Imagine the quantity of lab gloves that, it's policy, it's health and safety policy to have correct PPE for everyone that steps into the lab. Page 1. Okay, everyone complies But sometimes people will put their gloves on just to bring in a box of deliveries, or just to open up a fridge, check for their samples, close it, and then leave the lab. There's a lot of back and forth to and from the lab. And so being able to recycle the mountain of gloves that hasn't been in contact with anything inherently hazardous, that's already like a quick win. And all it takes is for you to get a bin that has a downstream route once it's full that goes the right way, and not to an incinerator, or to an autoclave first and an incinerator later on anyway.
Thanks. Anyone else? Any insights? I'll just grab this one.
Okay, yeah, just I guess part of this, you can see the picture there. There are other. Appleton was a very good company. Here, our parent company, Eppendorf, obviously have now sort of bio-based plastic. So this was, just kind of a slight segue to that. But please have a look at those. They may be a lot more sustainable than the regular plastics. But moving on to what do we know about automation? And I think some of this has been already mentioned in the presentation. But what do we know about automation and how this can help sustainability, make labs more sustainable? Again, a very sort of general, wide question. So I'm keen perhaps for Emma to jump in here and just elaborate a little bit more on part of her presentation, perhaps from earlier.
Yeah, sure. I think it links very much to your question earlier. So maybe to give a couple of examples, one might be to do with space. So we'll see labs that are wanting to have automation hubs. So they'll have 3 or 4, let's say, systems which they allow anyone in that set of labs or that building to go and access. That becomes a kind of, I guess, a specialty area of automation. So all of that lab equipment is being utilized by a whole range of different groups, where something like Clustermarket may be very helpful. So interested in chatting through how we might be able to partner there. So space is a really big component. The other is to do with consumables and tips in particular. So we've seen on one of our projects moving away from a pre kind of genomics testing process that's previously been done just on a Beckman liquid handler, to have that across a whole range of different devices means that we're now doing dispensing on a specialist liquid dispenser, so a Mantis. And that saves us a huge number of tips every time that's done. So that's about a 75% reduction in the number of tips that's being used every single run. So we've talked kind of space, we've talked tips. Energy and power is interesting. A lot of these devices that we're using are present already at customer sites. So we're adding them onto a system and just adding in robot and rail, which pulls about 3 amps. So very small amounts of additional energy power. Hopefully that gives like a selection of different areas that we think about when it comes to sustainability. What I think would be lovely to do at some point is try and capture that as a whole for customer projects and say, like, this is the impact for you if you do this with automation versus without. But there are so many different dependent variables that I think it would be quite a challenge actually to work out how sustainable a particular solution is.
Okay, thank you very much, Emma. Anybody else to chip in there? Automation.
Okay, so the last one we have here, but one thing, just around the automation, I just want to say, I think, the more that you can do this, the less errors there are, I think, as well. From what we learn, the more people are documenting things, the more repeatable things are, using robots, I think this can really help with that Monday morning blues when maybe people have had a beer the night before or something, not quite concentrating. The robot is just gonna do what it does, and be successful. So, of course, you need someone to monitor them. But I think also the automation, built in with what would be the next subject, which is around actually probably we may end up repeating what Martin's question was, but looking at data management and cloud computing for sustainability, then actually people being able to work remotely, so knowing that they've got a robot in their labs, and some of it will be manual work still, but actually some of it will also be with robots. Okay, so yeah, perhaps here, just wanted to kind of think about what are the typical pain points, perhaps around maybe people considering sticking with paper, maybe moving. Why are they moving to data management, cloud computing for sustainability? Are there reasons why they wouldn't do this? So yeah, just kind of keen to understand what perhaps the challenges are in the lab. Might be a good one for Francesco just to think about. Maybe when you first looked at the operation of bringing Clustermarket on, being revolutionise on, and looking at other options as well. What kind of was difficult, and how did you overcome those difficulties, perhaps?
So I'll just start by saying that one of the benefits of working for a tech company is that people around you will more likely than not, be very tech savvy. And so I've been quite spoiled during that process. The moment I walked in, people were already, working with several different types of software for their data analysis, for our platform, or anything adjacent to that, or even for meetings, recordings, and everything. So we have very little paper. I think I may have used the printer maybe 5 times in almost 3 years. So there wasn't that much of a challenge in that way. I guess when it comes to change management and the phasing in something like Clustermarket, for instance, they were already on using a digital tool that, yes, was not fit for purpose, but it was sort of okay for what they needed anyway. And so there was some of them were reluctant to move away from that because it's been working so far. So, and that circles back to what I was saying previously, like the way that you do things matters. Like the time that you save, how you can easily access data related to that particular feature, all of that matters. So it was more about showing them the value of the new platform rather than, drop your pen and paper and then follow me, turn on your computer and let me teach you how to use the software. They already knew how to use software. It was more about convincing them that the right software that I had in mind was right for them too.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Maybe, I don't know, Morsal, if you have an insight here, because working with Clustermarket, this kind of software that you offer is right in this space. What do you see as challenges that the customers are facing, their obstacles to taking up on software like yours, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I do completely agree with Francesco in terms of the benefits. You were definitely lucky because a lot of people we speak with on a daily basis, and I mentioned that today as well, they use outdated system. They are still using pen and paper in their labs when it comes to booking their equipment. And when I mentioned to them and show them the solution, one of the questions they always ask me is, it's going to be difficult to convince the team. Even though they use pen and paper, because they have been using it for a long time, and I think it's something has to do with, Francesco mentioned that they were already using a tool, so that helps a bit, and especially if you see the problems and the challenges you have with your current system. But if you have a way of working in the lab, whether that's a pen or a spreadsheet, and you're used to that, you don't want to make changes. Changes are never something people are keen to do, especially when it comes to lab work and with operational solutions. But once they have started it, and that's what we do, we try to make the software as user-friendly so the adoption rate is high, so people don't really struggle with finding it difficult to use. And answering your questions in terms of pain points, for researchers, it's a different pain points, but for someone who is managing the lab on the operational side, they have a lot of work on their plate. They have to do a lot of admin work. They have to capture different data on a different level. If they do it on a paper basis, completely a mess. But if they do it with spreadsheets, they have to usually they don't have the data, in fact. But that's what we have been hearing, and very commonly they still use outdated systems, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think that all valid points there, and yeah, thank you very much, Morsal. I think yeah, we hear a lot of people where yeah, sometimes that there's a group that's really for this kind of software, and all the benefits that come with that we've already discussed. But there's always another group that are less for it, and it's interesting. I think it's about having I think having a trial and having a go at these things can be useful. And there are other obstacles. I mean, we find people can't dedicate the time to it because they're busy. This can actually help free up some time. So by putting a few days aside a week or a few hours aside a week, it can be really helpful. There's no money. Well, actually, there can be a lot of efficiency savings with these, and we've talked about wastage as well. Likewise, high electricity consumption if they're using lots of pieces of equipment. And maybe we already see a scheme with Eppendorf at King's College London where they're now trading in 2 freezers for a new one. And these kind of schemes can be helpful to actually go, well, we only need one. Why have we got all these freezers? And they're all old and they're all inefficient. So these things can all contribute to sustainability. I don't know if there's anybody else who wanted to pitch in here around the software.
Just one quick trip that I realized very early on. And by the way, everyone in the room knows about this. Scientists love data. You want to phase in a new bit of software, a new protocol, whatever. Show them the data. Show them that we do this, we're going to get this. And you're going to get this and this and this. It's not just about the features. It's the benefits that they get, like the tangible benefits that they can get out of it that also matters, and what will eventually and hopefully convince them to
I mean, another thing as well with these systems, I think also that often, certainly with our software, your name is sort of timestamped now. It's a good thing or a bad thing, but kind of it makes you think. People start to become a bit more productive, but they start to think a bit smarter about how they're going to be working, and that they're responsible for what they do waste and what they don't waste, and yeah. So I think these can be good. I'll just move on to perhaps I don't know if Andy, there was one thing you want to contribute around software or your experience. No.
I can add food for thought just from an automation standpoint.
Thank you.
When it comes to cloud computing, there's one really big benefit, which is remote support. So anywhere in the world our systems are, we can log in here in London, here in the US, and support as and when needed. So that obviously has benefits from a immediacy standpoint of being able to provide great service, but also from a sustainability standpoint. We don't have to ship our service engineers off on planes every single moment.
Yep,
that was the added.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. And I think, it's, just thinking about the automation, thinking about the software, what we now, post-COVID, such cliche, but what we find is that maybe we don't need to be in the lab, 5 days a week. Maybe there is a bit more flexibility. This can also mean that there's less emissions when you're traveling to and from work. And then maybe also your staff, increase happiness, productivity, and things like that. So I think these can all be nice add-ons as well. With this kind of software and also automation. Just want to double check here. Had to ask the audience part 2. Maybe what do you think about sustainability and equipment, materials and reagents, automation, data management? Do you have any questions for our panel here at all, like Martin earlier? Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead. I'll bring the mic over.
Hi. So just in mind with what Francesco was saying earlier, the 5-year sort of timeline between when you saw about LEAF and then getting your bronze or silver certification. With that in mind, it was just got me thinking about how long it would take maybe to make a lab more sustainable, and where do you think we'll be in 20 years' time in labs?
Without jumping, good question. Thank you. Without jumping too far into the future, I will just say that the lab that I did my PhD in about 10 years, slightly over 10 years ago, looks very different compared to the lab that I've been working in or that I have seen over the past few years. So we have already come a long way, and the future is both bright and really dark at the same time. So when it comes to sustainability specifically, I guess your setup will have to inform your policies, right? So what used to work or considered to be enough 10 years ago, that does not hold anymore these days already. And so we're going to have to change the policies and what we're looking at and all of the different, and we're capable of capturing so much more data these days compared to, like I said, like even a decade ago, Andy's presentation with all of those data points. And yes, it was mostly performed by hand, but it was already like a completely different mindset to the stuff that I started reading on when I first, tried to dip my toes in the world of sustainability when I was a PhD student. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question in full, but.
Thank you. Anybody else want to answer the question there? Or?
Yeah. I want to do some answering.
Thank you. I think in 20 years, if we're all still alive and there's still labs and crisps, sustainability will just be mandatory. It won't be the option. It will be ingrained in everything we do. All the standards of things like procurement will be, I think, mandated at a governmental level and a policy level rather than voluntarily something that, a manufacturer might have to pay, fund. I think some of the systems we've got out at the moment, although they come from a good intention, can actually be unintentionally misleading to people. Having a certain type of label, some people might just think that's a stamp of approval, and even if you do have these labels, are the data comparable? There could be some really good products out there that don't want to pay for these labels, but if there is government testing as standard, we could identify some fantastic products out there that come from a company that don't have a massive marketing budget. They just focus on the product itself in a more circular economy. And yeah, I think that would probably be it for me. I think science would have to be sustainable. I think there would probably be a couple of robots walking around helping you out doing stuff, or you can control them with the Tesla chip in your brain when it's not controlling you. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Andy. Anybody else want to chip in there at all?
Yeah, just to sort of emphasise that I think a lot of the big pharma are already starting this trend. There's a lot of policies with some of the customers that we work with where they have to be, very aware of their carbon footprint. People not being sent to SLAS Boston, which is like the biggest automation conference of the year because of carbon footprint. And those questions are starting to come up. There's discussions that are happening on a weekly basis with our customers. We have a dashboard for all of our in-service customers where we talk them through what's the operational number of hours that you've had on your system this week, what's your success rate, but also what's your sustainability and tip usage, and how many tips are you saving. So those discussions are happening, and I think it'll be top down from a lot of the big pharma.
Thank you very much indeed. Hope to see you at the next eLab Discovery Day. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.